Major funding for these programs has been provided by grants from Capital One Bank and Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, SJP Properties, Greenberg Traurig, New York Community Bank, Bank of America. Additional funding for these programs has been provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Investment Fund, Cushman & Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, XL Realty Advisors, LP, Essex Capital Partners, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, GVA Williams, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Helmsley Spear, Herbert J. Sims and Company, Herrick Feinstein, LLP, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Katsimatidis, Kilroy Metal Products, Marcus and Millichap, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Muss Development, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sheldrake Organization, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, the Moynihan Organization.
Welcome to Building in New York. My name is Michael Stoller. You know, I love interviewing people who are the root of New York City. Guys who grew up here, who were born in New York, who built in New York. And today I'm fortunate to have a guy who's been around for many years in New York, who's been responsible for building a lot of affordable housing. I'm here with the principal of the Briarwood Organization, Vinny Riso.
Thank you.
So Vinny, you know, sometimes when I interview people beforehand, you know, I said, where were you born, and some information. And, you know, some people say I was born in Mount Sinai, I was born in Lutheran Hospital. Vinny Riso was born where?
On the kitchen table.
On the kitchen table. Tell me the situation. I know that Grandpa, great-grandpa Luigi came over in 1901, right?
Right.
And he came over originally in 1901, and then for some reason he went to Argentina?
He was trying to accumulate some money to pass on to the family back home in Italy, and split his time between Argentina and New York.
And then when did he come here permanently?
1912.
Okay, in 1912 he comes to America. Is he married to Grandma at this time?
Yes, he is.
He's married to Grandma. He has two sons?
He had 3 sons and a daughter.
3 sons and a daughter. One happens to be, was your father?
Correct.
Vincent?
Yes.
Correct. And now, so he's a carpenter originally, right?
That's correct.
And then he becomes a contractor. How does a carpenter become a contractor and a builder?
Well, I think if you have that that gnawing feeling in your stomach that you want to be more than a laborer, you try for it.
So in 1912, when he comes over, he creates L. Riso and Son. L. Riso and Sons?
Well, my grandfather did,
right.
yes.
So L. Riso and Sons was incorporated in 1912.
Correct.
And I think one of the first projects were Riso houses in 1927?
There were a number of projects in and around 1927, primarily in Jackson Heights and Corona.
So now what happens, it's the Depression. And you said to me when we got together a couple weeks ago, the only thing that came out of the Depression was you lost everything but your good name.
Well, they lost everything but their good name.
Right. And so right after the Depression, 1934, Vincenzo is born, right? On the kitchen table.
That's correct.
Now, the interesting thing that you were telling me about your childhood and your life is that your dad always lived in houses that he built with other relatives, which also served as their offices. So you were born where?
I was born in one of the homes in Jackson Heights. Builders then and today, when they have a job that doesn't sell, it's not uncommon for them to move into one of the homes.
So when you were a youth, where'd you grow up originally? Because I remember there was high school, you started in City, Corona.
Well, I went to grammar school at PS 152 in Woodside, spent a semester at Bryant High School in Long Island City, and then we moved to Bayside because we couldn't sell the houses.
Now, your aunt and uncle lived in the house also?
That's correct.
So it was what? It was the true three family, or?
No, it was a two family that was converted to a three in Jackson Heights. My aunt and uncle lived on the first floor. We other Risos lived on the second floor, and we rented out the third floor.
So now you told me when you went to public school and went to high school, you always worked on the construction site, and then on, just like our friend Josh Muss, on Sundays, if there was a project that you were building, you were the salesman, right?
Absolutely. My father dropped me off in the morning and picked me up in the evening.
So now, okay, you graduate high school. And then you decide, this is New York City, this is Manhattan. You decide to go up to the Bronx, not the Bronx, to Upper Manhattan, to the Heights, to go to City College up in the Heights, correct?
NYU.
NYU. And you stay at NYU for a couple years, and then there was something called the Korean War.
Yes, and at that time I volunteered. It was one of the few times that I've done that. I've learned a lot since. I volunteered and spent 2 years during the Korean War in the Army, primarily in Texas.
So now I think it's 1957. You're 23 years of age, and you come back from the Army, and your father says, Vincent, here's the keys to the business. Here's the business. What did he exactly say at that time?
Well, he didn't exactly give me the keys to the business. What he did is he handed me the checkbook, and he said, this is yours. I'm working for you.
Now, you said to me at that time, but later on in your life, there are two stories. One of them was you thought you deserved $50 a week, but you only brought home $25 a week?
Well, that's all the business could afford.
Right. And then the other story was later on in your life, your father said, you said to your dad, or he said to you, that you lost some money on some of these deals, but he didn't want to tell you how much?
I brought it up to him, and I said, Dad, I got to tell you this. I screwed up. I did this, and then I did that, and I lost about $3,000. And his answer to me was, no, you started before that, and you screwed up many more times, and it was closer to $45,000 to $5,000. My question to him was, why didn't you tell me? He says, I was paying for your education.
Good education. So now, when you came back, you have a younger brother, Raymond, right?
I do.
You and Raymond went to the El Riso and Sons. Your father gave the brothers the business.
Correct.
And people, vintage today, we're 2008, 2009, they don't realize that Queens really was farm country, right?
Well, a lot of it was, and we moved from Jackson Heights to Bayside in the mid-40s, 1947, again because we couldn't sell a home. And the Riso brothers moved to that home in Bayside, and we've been Baysiders in a sense ever since.
Now, you did a lot of, over the years, besides the affordable, which I'm going to definitely get to, a lot of the developments that you built were 1- and 2 family homes in Bayside and in Flushing.
That's correct.
So what was the most memorable of those developments? I mean, you built one which was 16 stories, which was one of the tallest buildings in Flushing at that time, right?
Yes. Prior to that, we had built 20 houses on Parsons Boulevard in Flushing, and then 68 houses on Corporal Kennedy Street, 68 two-family houses in Bayside. We then built our first apartment house in Flushing.
That was the 6-story?
That was a 6-story.
And that you made a co-op, right? So you gave
years later, after running it as a rental, we converted it into a co-op. At the same time, at that time, the bank called Hamburg Savings Bank was running into a problem a few blocks away from that apartment house, and asked us to take over another 6-story of 52 units to complete its construction, and we purchased that, and we then converted that to a co-op over the years.
So how do you get to, now reading your website, you built some boys club places, you built some bank branches, you even built a funeral home. How do you get to build the 16-story building? I mean, from building the 2 families, when was the 16-story building in Flushing?
Well, as time went on, we became more efficient, and our egos led us to a high-rise type of construction. And we did a number of high-rise buildings in downtown Flushing.
But then you had that accident, right? You remember you told me about the one accident with the elevator.
We were building a building in Bayside, and as general contractors, and we had a partial collapse of the upper brick wall, and that put us into a lot of problems. But the fact that we had a good reputation allowed us to escape liens from our contractors.
But you told me when we were talking about mentors in your life, your dad, needless to say, was one of them. But perhaps one of your mentors you met was due to this accident that happened, right?
Yes, an architect in Flushing recommended a Nathan Walker to me. Nathan was a Manhattan attorney, had an office in the Lincoln Building, and he became my mentor as well as my attorney.
So New York City. The key to New York City, it's a great city to live in, but people need homes. And we were talking about this. You got involved in the mid-'70s, or maybe a little later, with Kathy Wild and Claire Schulman, who has had a major involvement with your life in many aspects that we'll get to.
That's correct.
But Claire, besides introducing you to Sophie, your wife of 35 years, the interesting thing is New York City in the 70s, early 80s had some trouble. And you had a lot of vacant land. People gave the property back. What happened? You told me the partnership, Kathy Wild and Claire Schulman.
Well, Kathy had come to my office no less than twice, trying to pitch the idea that we build partnership housing.
Explain to my audience, what do you mean by partnership housing?
Well, partnership housing in the early 80s was a situation where the city was able to put in land. The city had a lot of land at that time. They were able to put in land at a very, very low cost of $500 a unit. There were subsidies that went along with that, and that allowed the partnership, together with a partnership builder such as us, to develop and sell and have these buildings occupied by low-income working families.
But what happened is you gave the opportunity to produce somebody the right of home ownership. Now, someone who came up with little money now had a 2-family or a 3-family home where they lived in one of the units, correct?
Correct.
And they'd rent out the other one. And over the years, you've built many of these units. But I think one of them, you told me there was one square block that you built up in the Bronx many years ago.
Yes, on Claremont Avenue.
And tell my audience, that was an interesting. There were drug addicts, there were hookers. I mean, what was on that street at that time?
Not only did we have
Fort Apache, as they would call it.
Something like that. Yes, it was near Fort Apache. It had not only the druggies and the hookers, but there were homeless people living in shacks on the site before we started. After we got finished with these homes, these homeowners, primarily the women, the wives, if they saw somebody spit on their sidewalk, they'd come out with brooms and chase them away. So, you know, all the stories about, you know, the German families in Greenpoint keeping pristine sidewalks and pushing crime away came right up to Claremont Avenue.
Now, people fail to remember that in the early 1980s, the Upper West Side, 80th Street, which I don't really call truly the Upper West Side, 80th, 85th Street, 90th Street, was really a drug-infested, terrible location. And you started building the Centra. Let's talk about the Centra. What was the Centra? Tell us, because that was part of the West Side urban renewal.
Yes, if we look at this at the Upper West Side now, we think of it as, you know, one of the places to be. Back in the early 80s, it was the West Side urban renewal area, and this site was West Side urban renewal Site 40.
Where was the site?
The site was on Columbus Avenue between 88th and 89th, and it was the first market rate condominium to be built under the West Side Urban Renewal Program.
What was there prior to the construction?
When we got there, it was a demolished site. Obviously, in previous years, there were tenements on the site. But we came into a demolished site.
And what was the Centra?
The Centra was a 111-unit building. 108 units in a 9-story building. 108 units were residential. Then there was 11,000 foot of retail space, plus a 19,000-foot garage.
Now, originally this was created so people could have home ownership, correct?
That's correct.
Was it market rate home ownership, or there was a lottery like we have on others?
No, at that time it was market rate home ownership.
And you said to me that then we got back into another recession, and you were in the middle of selling, and you couldn't sell all the units at that time.
Well, we converted the building in '85, and you know, towards the end of '85, beginning of '86, there was a softening of the market, and with approximately 3/4 of the units sold, we had to resort to renting the balance of the units.
And subsequently, they were all sold.
Subsequently, they were all sold.
But you told me a great story about you're at that site, and there's this old gentleman who's walking around the site with a pair of pajamas, and he says, "Kid, I want to know about these apartments." It's a great story. Tell my audience that story.
Well, there's this old Jewish gentleman who I thought was a bum from the way he was dressed. He was wearing slippers, pants with holes in them, and he asked me, "Sonny," he says, "how much are these apartments?" And I said, "Pop," I says, "these are expensive." Well, obviously they weren't expensive by today's prices, but he says, "They're expensive." He said, "Don't let my clothes fool you." He said, "I live on Central Park West," and he reached into his pocket and took out a folded $20 bill, and he said, "This is my mugging money." So that's how bad it was at that time.
Yes, and the neighborhood has truly changed. But you know, you talk about neighborhoods. I mean, you've built many houses, and I'll get later on to the newest project that you're building in the Bronx. But really, in the 90s, Harlem was another area of vacant land. And I mean, nobody would go, you know, what happened is they said 96th Street was the dividing line, then it was 106th Street. And Vinnie Riso, through a variety of the New York City programs, you build, and I've passed them and I've been there, you build a beautiful number of assortment of 2- and 3-family homes on Madison Avenue and Park Avenue and recently. Tell me a little bit about those homes that you built over there.
Well, our first venture into Manhattan was the 5th Avenue Homes, a site on between Park and Madison, 117th and 118th Street. Those were 43-family, 4-story homes, and since there was HUD money involved, half of them had to be available to people at 60% of AMI.
A very immediate income, right.
Right, and that equated to $357,500. Those homes today, that was in 2001. Those homes today are selling for $1.2 million, $1.3 million.
Now, were those with lottery also?
Those with lottery, yes.
So those people who were fortunate enough to win those lottery and sold the homes today really did very well.
They did extremely well.
Now, but you're continuing to build in that neighborhood today. Aren't you building some new homes over there today?
Yes, we've finished 14 3-family, 4-story homes on 119th Street, and 2 9-story cooperative buildings on the same block, with another 111 apartments. Those are sold and occupied, and the tail end of the job is 3-family, 4-story homes currently on 120th Street, which are market rate.
And now we go back, you know, your roots are in Queens, now we really go back into Queens. And people forget, I mean, my story is that when I was in the Army Reserve, which many of my guests and viewers would not believe, but yes, I was in the Army Reserve during the Vietnam crisis, and I spent my time in Rockaways, right over the bridge, the Marine Park Bridge. But Rockaways were really a terrible, destitute area. And you got involved with Arvern, the renewal in Arvern in 2001. Tell us about the Arvern renewal.
Well, Arvern was the Hamptons West. It's the same beach, the same ocean. However, because of the number of New York City projects that were built in Arvern, it was crime-laden, had poor schools, and many of the old bungalows that remained from the 20s.
So what you do over there? I mean,
well, we won a.
If you talk about the Bronx with drugs, Arvern was not much better. I mean,
not much better at all. We were the pioneers there. We won one of the first RFPs. I'm sorry, we did not win the first RFP. The first RFP we went into with Related and Hovnanian, and thank God we lost it to Forest City. They dropped, from what I understand, about $6 million there.
So let's talk about your project, your first development in Arvern.
Our first development consisted of 40 homes. Two-family homes on scattered sites between Beach 59th and Beach 62nd Street, Rockaway Beach Boulevard, and the ocean.
And the same opportunities that someone could have the home ownership. How much were these houses at that time?
At that time, they were in the range of $250,000 for the home.
And today?
Today, we're building similar homes. We're building 130 units today, and those homes are going for about $250,000 an apartment.
An apartment. And before it was $250,000 for a two-family home.
Correct.
So good appreciation plus the opportunity. And now you're also building in the Bronx, something called the Solari?
Yes. Up on Grant Avenue between East 168th and 167th and 169th, we are building two 10-story buildings that will be the first home ownership site in that community board in the Bronx.
So, you know, I brought up Claire Schulman before, the former borough president of Queens. Claire was responsible for introducing you to your wife, right, Sophie?
Yes, I've always said I would never forgive her for that, but I was wrong.
And how'd that happen? I mean, Sophie had lost a husband, and you had met Sophie before. Claire and Sophie owned a boutique?
That's correct. They owned a boutique together. And I was down at City Hall one morning to speak for infill housing, and Claire was there to speak against it. And we were sitting next to each other during the goings-on, and Claire was complaining that they had to go shopping. Well, I suggested, a gentleman that I was, that she could give me her speech and I would give the pros and the cons. I can't say what she said to me in return. But, you know, when we broke for lunch, I spirited my wife Sophie away, and the story starts.
So now, but you have two wonderful children.
I have two children, Lonnie in California, a photographer, and Daria in Westport, Connecticut.
And they have?
They have three grandchildren between them.
And they are?
Kelly, the eldest, Daniel, and Roxanne.
Okay. So now, El Riso, you changed the name to the Briarwood Organization a number of years ago to cut it from the ethnic situation. I don't know why. El Riso was still fine to me. But who's been with you all those years? It's been your brother?
My brother, Raymond, my partner, Howard Goodman, and my nephew, Jim Riso.
And now, the next generation, we're making it, the fourth generation of, is joining the company?
Well, we have my, my grandson, Daniel, who is working with us for the last year.
So, you know, if you look at it this way, you know, when Luigi came here, you know, in 1912, the family has truly been builders of New York.
Well, I guess you could say that, yes.
You know, and I think building affordable housing, building market rate housing, building a variety of things truly is what makes New York, and I'm really happy that you've been my guest today.
Thank you very much.
Major funding for these programs has been provided by grants from Capital One Bank and Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, SJP Properties, Greenberg Traurig, New York Community Bank, Bank of America. Additional funding for these programs has been provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Investment Fund, Cushman & Wakefield, Eastern Consolidated, XL Realty Advisors, LP, Essex Capital Partners, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, GVA Williams, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Helmsley Spear, Herbert J. Sims and Company, Herrick Feinstein, LLP, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Katzimatidis, Kilroy Metal Products, Marcus and Millichap, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Muss Development, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sheldrake Organization, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, the Moynihan Organization.